Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
My guest today is Steve Phillip. For over 20 years, Steve Phillip was a successful consultant, trainer, and keynote speaker in the world of sales and marketing. On December the 4th, 2019, he received a call that would change his world completely. His son Jordan had taken his own life. Steve was faced with two choices: give in to debilitating despair that was beginning to take over, or create something to prevent other families from having to experience the trauma of losing a loved one to suicide. Fortunately, he chose the latter. With a LinkedIn following of more than 34,000, his articles and posts have engaged a global audience of millions. Early in 2020, he established the Jordan Legacy CIC to provide support to those struggling with their mental health or considering suicide. Whilst accepting the position as head of mission at Champion Health UK Limited, a rapidly growing tech and client services company in the world of workplace employee well-being. Steve's lived experience of suicide, combined with his reputation as a highly engaging speaker, will help you understand the importance of looking after your own mental well-being and, in turn, looking out for those who you care about. Hi, Steve, and welcome to the show. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, Madeline. Yeah, nice to be able to finally meet at last. We've been in touch for some time now,
it's
so this
really
is good
to meet you over the Zoom waves. So because the show is called Unbroken, the very first question that I ask everyone is, what does that word unbroken mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I suppose I have to relate it probably to my own journey, my personal journey since Jordan took his own life. And you know, many times people have asked me, how do you manage to carry on and do what you do? And I suppose it was really that choice, as you mentioned in the introduction there, that I had to either be broken apart by what had happened, or to get on. I think a lot of people were relying on me to do that, or I felt, or I assumed that role at least, and I had to stay unbroken in order to do what I've been able to do in the last 18 months. So really, I think it kind of, the term unbroken really resonates with the journey that I've been on to date, really.
And I think the word you use that's so important is choice. You did have a choice to go many directions, but you chose to stay unbroken. So we know that Jordan took his own life, not just nearly 2 years ago in December it will be. What was Jordan like as a young man? He was 34, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He was, and it's kind of interesting as a parent, you see one side of your children, and Jordan was, you know, a lovely lad, and every parent's going to say that, but he was polite, he was loving, he was considerate. He could be moody, for sure, and I think on reflection, we know he was somebody that was quite private as far as the family was concerned. It was, in fact, a devil of a job trying to get together and meet up with him or get him over for dinner or go somewhere. There was always a reason he was busy. On reflection, we now believe that was probably more him protecting himself and maybe us from some of the challenges he was going through with his depression. But really, after his death, it's when I got to meet, you know, so many of his friends, and a huge circle of friends, and some very close friends. I mean, he had 3 or 4 individual groups of friends, from university to Leeds, where he lived, to Morecambe, where he grew up, and within those group of friends, every one of those groups had at least one individual considered Jordan to be their best friend, and yet a lot of these groups didn't know each other, and you know, it's a measure that he had such a huge amount of love, and it was that point, as I got to talk really to his friends, that they would talk about this lad who was the life and soul of kind of the parties, with his dance moves, how cool he was, good looking, you know, how everyone kind of looked up to him. When he walked into a room, you knew kind of someone special had walked in. And the other side of him, you know, where they would say that whenever they were in real trouble or struggling, he was the first to kind of be there, get in a car and drive the other end of the country if he had to support, you know, good friends. he was the guy that they kind of relied on to be there for them, and most of them had no idea what he was dealing with underneath all that.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it's interesting to hear that he would do anything for anyone, and yet he really struggled to come forward to let you or his friends know what was going on. I mean, were there any signs for you beforehand? I know it's easy to look back retrospectively, but at the time, were you aware that he had mental health issues or he was struggling?
Yeah. I think it first came to light back in 2015, where he was really struggling, and at that point got to such a low point that myself and his stepmom, living in near Harrogate, brought Jordan, who was living just down the road from us with a girlfriend at the time, to come and live with us. He was rock bottom. His mum had been really concerned about the state of his well-being, and it was that time that he actually went to see a doctor and was diagnosed with clinical depression. So up until that point, there was no formal diagnosis. He, was obviously struggling. I had little or no understanding of mental health issues. His mother, my ex-wife, on the other hand, had been a psych nurse, mental health nurse for over 20 years. So she had recognized the signs. And, I reflect on the conversation she would often have with me, where she would show real concern. And so I'd get on the phone to Jordan and we'd have a chat. And I said, oh, he seems fine. I've had a chat. I just didn't understand it. I had no knowledge. So that was the first time really it was brought home to me. And we had him live with us for several weeks at least, where his stepmom did a wonderful job with him here, and we kind of got him stabilized and kind of ready to go back out into the world. Subsequent to that, over the next 4 years plus until his death, if Jordan experienced another episode of depression and anxiety, he would go back to the GP and once again be prescribed antidepressants to support him. But with the exception of some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in that first period of 2015, we're not aware that he had any other talking therapy. His route was GP, get the medication, get on with life.
And it sounds like he was very good at wearing a mask, maybe to protect you or just to not admit out loud. I guess it's hard to say the words out loud that I'm struggling or I have depression.
Yeah, and I think until the final months really, and where he did clearly kind of put his hand up and say I'm struggling more or not doing so well, and that was very close to the end. He really started to recognise he was struggling, I think, at that point. But the rest of the time, yeah, he would put on this mask. He'd turn up at the house, and yeah, you could tell he was a little off and a little quiet, maybe. But with his friends, just completely the opposite. So, yeah, I'm sure he was kind of protecting everyone from what he was going through there.
And the day that you received the call, it was from his girlfriend, Charlotte, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I talk about this so many times, and I was just talking with Jordan's sister, obviously my daughter Danielle, the other day about how we look back at that time now, and in some ways you do forget just how traumatic it was 18 months later. Now I keep a journal, and I wrote everything in from shortly afterwards, so I have that to reflect upon and look about those days and those moments that we were going through. But yes, to get that call, the one moment I was out there delivering a social media training workshop to a large automotive group, been quite a stressful day, and preparing for it in terms of the subject matter, specifically one I wasn't that familiar with. So big relief. I get into my car thinking, job done, great day. Put the phone into the holder on the dashboard there, about to turn the ignition key, and Charlotte's name appeared on the screen, and then boom, I have this distressed young lady on the phone there just telling me that Jordan had taken his own life, and just apologizing, and
She
yeah,
was apologizing to you.
she was just saying, just her words, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's Jordan. He's killed himself. It's and you just go, it's really hard even now to comprehend just how I absorb
Yes.
that.
Well, I've heard your
Just,
story many times, and
yeah.
I'm a mum of three, and even now I still get goosebumps when I hear you say it. I just, as
Mm,
obviously as a parent, you couldn't receive a worse phone call. That is the worst phone call ever, to hear your
no.
child has passed before you.
Yeah, and in such a manner
Yes.
as well, because it was a complete surprise. I know a lot of people say that, but we never anticipated. Even his mother, who had the mental health experience as a psych nurse, never contemplated that Jordan would ever go that far.
Mhm.
Although subsequently we've been able to read his journals and notes and all kinds of things he left behind.
But he didn't
Um,
leave you a note or a letter to explain, did he?
He did leave. He did
Oh, he
leave a
did.
note both to Charlotte and one to ourselves.
Mhm.
Therein, lies the story of, in the first article I published, of how we didn't get to see those notes for
Okay, I
weeks and
didn't know there
weeks.
was a note. Okay.
Yeah, it was in a notebook, a brand new notebook that had been gifted to him by his mum and his sister. Never used until that moment. And Charlotte saw the note as she went in, but obviously she was dealing initially with can we save Jordan, what's going on, and the neighbour that was trying to help her get into the house. Police were called very quickly, and the ambulance, and she never got to see the book. She briefly saw there was a note to herself, but didn't get time to read it. The book was taken away as part of the evidence, of course,
Okay.
by the police. And I have to say, it was only several weeks later that we actually understood there was a note to the family, to Jordan's mum, his sister, and myself on the second page. So we only assumed there was ever a note to Charlotte for several weeks
Mhm.
afterwards.
And did it help to receive this letter, this note?
They were both brief. It was a small kind of A5 type book, I suppose, and just again, Jordan just apologising for what he's done, and he was the best family that he could have wished for, and he knew how much this was going to hurt us, but it's the only way that he could deal with the thoughts, in his own words, that were literally showing him no way out, is
Yeah.
is how he phrased it. So it was short, a short note. um yeah, just
And it is very hard for anyone listening. People that know my story know that I've attempted suicide and landed me in a psychiatric ward for a good few months. I didn't even know that I'd had my stomach pumped. It was a serious attempt. And for me, I didn't really want to die. I can't speak on Jordan's behalf, but I just wanted it all to end. It was just exhausting what was going on in my head, and the pain
yeah.
and the darkness, and just that never seeing a way out. It's really, yeah, just exhausting.
And this is something I think I've learned, Madeline, over the last 18 months, as I've become immersed in the world of mental health and
Mhm.
suicide prevention, that we know, all the research studies from those that were attempted and survived, who said we didn't really want to die. We just wanted this pain, be it physical or mental, to go away, but we saw no way out of that. So yeah, so we know that's the case, really.
And reading some of your articles, it's the little things that you found, that he had locked the door from the inside, but there was a leaflet from Mind. He had a doctor's appointment in a couple of weeks. There was a shopping list. So it seems like he was doing stuff to help himself.
Yeah, and this is interesting, isn't it? That you see this huge, what would you call it? This gap between him writing a suicide note that morning, planning what he was going to do in the house, by the same token, having this leaflet from Mind still in front of him, having a shopping list of several items written out. The fact that when I walked into the kitchen the next day, there was a half-eaten, bowl of porridge and a glass of water. So the fact he was still having breakfast,
Mhm.
you know, um, to me, that just smacks of, I don't really want to do this, but I've kind of got to do this. This state of mind, at that moment in time, where very rationally doing what he was doing, but just this two worlds almost,
Yes, absolutely.
almost like a
That's
sliding doors moment, I suppose.
Yeah, two different places speaking to him, his heart and his head, really, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. And how does a family survive that? How do you pick yourself up? You have a daughter who's no longer got a brother, you no longer have your son. How do you all recover and heal from something like that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've spoken to many bereaved families since, families that have come to me for an answer to that question, and many of those very recently who are trying to answer that question for themselves or in the early days. I think the very simple answer to that is you just do somehow, because the alternative is you just don't get up
Yeah.
and don't get out of bed. And I spoke to a young lady recently who called me, just said, I wonder if you could speak to my mother. She's, we lost my brother in 2018. She's not come out of her bedroom since. But in the main, people do get up, and you kind of get up because it's kind of what we do. You have a family, you have others around you. You carry this huge weight and this huge burden with you. But as many people told me in the early days, the grief never gets any smaller. You just somehow grow
Yeah.
around
You
that,
get
if you
used to
like.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, do you get used to it? It's an interesting term as well, isn't it? That you just kind of recognize that, well, there is just an alternative. There's an alternative. You just do nothing and let it consume you, or you get up. And I think the process, what I found most useful from my point of view, was doing stuff right from the beginning. I knew I had to kind of take control of the situation from a family point of view right away. People to call, things to deal with. There was then Jordan's affairs that needed dealing with, and we live in a digital world. Any paper records Jordan had of his life were atrocious. They're just hopeless. So we knew everything would be on laptops and phones. We've still to this day not been able to get into his mobile phone. The police can't do it. Can't do that. So fortunately, with some tech help that I had through somebody I know, we managed to get into his laptop and his Gmail account, and then started to unravel where were his investments, who was he dealing with for his mortgage, because there's just no paper trail records at all. So that had to be dealt with. Then the funeral had to be dealt with. And then as we were going through all this mess, I just thought, God, is this what people have to go through? This impact of losing someone, period, but losing someone in such a traumatic and sudden way where nothing was put in place to prepare us for it. And I think it was at that moment that I thought, well, if we're going through this, what are others going through? And do those that are contemplating taking their own lives really understand what they're going to leave behind in terms of a ripple effect? Because by now I'm talking to friends of Jordan's and work, that and all this, and it was clear the impact his suicide was having on them. So that's when I chose to write that article on LinkedIn just 3 weeks later, on December the 16th. And that article was it was titled, The Day My Son Took His Own Life. And it was very much aimed at, I think, those that were contemplating taking their own lives, to say, don't just stop for a moment. And because whatever you write in that note about, I understand what this will do to you, you will never understand at all. And if that is enough just to stop you taking that step, and that's kind of why I published and wrote it. So I think a combination of all those things really, Madeline, meant I just carried on and have carried on.
And you've really kind of turned your pain into purpose, and you've started his legacy. Can you tell us what you hope to achieve, or what does it do, the legacy, the Jordan legacy it's called, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think initially what started to happen after I published that article was I got this huge outpouring globally from people, but some of those people were people who were struggling and considering taking their own lives, or just struggling with their mental health. And it became very clear to me suddenly I was someone they wanted to come to and say, look, I'm struggling, how can you help? Immediately that raised alarm bells for me, because I was not a mental health professional. I understood still nothing really about the world of mental health. So I went to Jordan's mum as a qualified mental health nurse, and also spoke to Charlotte, who, at the time of Jordan's death, was just about to put her dissertation in to become qualified as a clinical psychologist, and something she's subsequently gone on to do in the last 12 months, and at the end of last year qualified, and now works as a clinical psychologist in Sheffield in a medical practice. Just incredible what she's done. So I said, look, I need help. I need to be able to signpost these people. What do I say? And so very quickly we had the obvious: contact your GP, A&E, Samaritan's, Mind, and we just had a kind of a standard set of signposting points I could share with people, whilst empathizing with them, but equally saying, look, I'm kind of a grieving father going through my own stuff as well at the moment, but look, you know, this is kind of what it's leaving behind for us, and that led to, I think, you know, fairly soon afterwards, me thinking, right, how can I make a difference? I know I have a voice on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn was my platform of choice and what I trained other users to do effectively, to raise their brand profile. Could I now use the platform to share a different message? Could we create a website maybe with something a little bit more robust to kind of signpost and guide people? And what that led to over then the coming weeks was attracting people to me who had experience in mental health and suicide prevention. And some of those people now working closely with me made me familiar with the Zero Suicide community globally and the work that they were doing. And that's now led Madeline to us looking at the Jordan legacy, not as a traditional charity and helpline at all. It's more about strategically, how can we work with communities and workplaces to put in place practical solutions to help prevent the practical act of suicide. And that, in a kind of nutshell, is kind of what we're looking to achieve.
I know you don't want other families, obviously, to experience what you go through, but you also say that you think it could have been preventable. And to me, that's almost, I don't know if that's guilt or your helplessness, or because how could you have prevented it? Really?
Yeah, I think there is, and all the research and all the studies and everything I've learned, that most suicides we know are preventable. Now, I think it's important to distinguish here between the mental health issues behind suicide. In most cases, not all of them are related to mental health issues, but the large proportion. But what we're talking about here is the practical act. How do we stop it? You know, someone getting to that point where they take their own life. The issues of dealing with their mental well-being and mental illness is something separate, and that's kind of part of what we're looking at. But we know that the actual act of suicide can be prevented, and then allow that person to get treatment. So if you look at some of the things, for example, that we're working on, we recently ran an online event called Design Out Suicide, where we invited architects, surveyors, construction companies, Network Rail, Highways England, and many other organisations and individuals interested to come and have a panel discussion and a debate around designing out suicide. So what we're talking about there is, you imagine all the bridges and the buildings and places that people use to take their own lives in the public domain. Right now, if someone, or there are a number of high instances, and we know people research these places quite often, visit the site many times before taking their own lives. The solution at the moment is to put a barrier up.
Sorry, that's just my co-host barking away there. We'll just ignore him. Sorry, yes, to put barriers up to prevent people from jumping.
So why don't we take a step forward and go, what about if those that design the bridges or the buildings in the first place actually consider building in methods to prevent someone jumping off the bridge, while still having aesthetically a really nice looking bridge that people want to access and walk across or drive across. And that's happening in a lot of cases right now. So we know that we can affect our future design of buildings to look at issues where we can prevent suicide. You know, for example, high-rise office buildings have latches on windows and mechanisms to prevent people accidentally falling out. But what's in place to stop someone deliberately jumping out? And this is the conversation we're having. And in fact, we're already quite some way down the line with one of our partners, Dr. Liz Walder, who has the ear of the Welsh government and the UK government. And we're looking very seriously at being in a position to effect changes to the building regulations in the UK already, as part of the work we've been doing through the Jordan legacy. So that's kind of one example of a real practical
Yes,
Uh,
one of my very early episodes, I spoke to a woman, Australian woman called Donna Thistlethwaite. I always struggle to say her last name. You may have come across her, and she jumped off a bridge and survived. It was like
mm,
30 feet, and she
mm.
now has put in place barriers that stop anyone from jumping, and also signs if you are feeling suicidal or struggling. Here's numbers and here's details of who to contact, who to speak
Yeah.
to.
And the Golden Gate Bridge, of course, there's some great examples of how they've done that, and discussions that were had, even on that bridge about how do we prevent. And there was all kinds of expensive solutions and redesigns and developments until someone said, could we put a net under the bridge?
Yes, catch
And
them.
everyone went, oh, okay. Simple solution in that case. But that was a solution. But again, we need to step back and go, that's kind of an after the thought for an existing structure. What do we do for our future development and designs? And I know we had over 430 people register and attend that event, and some really interesting debate and examples of how architects and design schools are making these changes already, which is exciting.
Well, when this episode goes out, it's more than likely going to be around December time, and hopefully we are out of COVID restrictions and we're living free again. But we know the impact that lockdowns, COVID, isolation has had on mental health. And my youngest daughter just came back from Leeds University, the end of her first year, and somebody there, a young girl in the building next to her, just took her life. And the impact it has on the young people as well. She comes back and says, I don't understand why did she do that? She was so sad it's hard to give the right advice, really, isn't it? What to say, because she really struggles with a couple of friends that have mental health issues. I said, how do I support them? I said, well, ask them, what works best for them when you're feeling like this. Do you want somebody with you? Do you not want somebody with you? Is there something I can do? Who should I call? But yeah, what advice would you give to somebody now that's struggling, or a family member or friend who's trying to support somebody?
And there's both sides of the coin we've got to look at. There's discussions we're having at the moment. How do you support somebody? I know I delivered a talk to the Cabinet Office this last week, and now had a conversation with someone from the Home Office yesterday about delivering a talk. And they said, how do we provide support for those living with somebody who's struggling, because there's that side of, already we know people who are carers for someone with physical illnesses or dementia struggle. So what support is there for people who are looking after someone with a mental health illness that isn't as visible, maybe? So it is a big issue. I think, what has to happen generally in our society, and it has improved significantly, I think, in the last 12 months, Madeline, is that we've got to be prepared to create safer spaces for people to open up and have the discussion. So if it's a student at university, what provisions are there where they feel they're in a psychologically safe environment that they can open up and talk? Same applies to workplaces and other community environments. So we've got to I know we're saying it's okay to talk, and the celebrities are sharing this, but if we're not providing physically and encouraging people to use these safe spaces, then it is just talk. It's
And
just a
it
nice
is
platitude.
such a tough year because they were told if it's good for their mental well-being they can go back to uni, and they're living in their rooms 24/7. They aren't designed to live in. They're designed to go to the library and meet their friends and
And
hang out at
party and do the
lectures.
things that students do,
They might still be doing a bit of that, but
Yeah,
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 but
yeah, yeah.
so you can see how the isolation is really dangerous. If somebody's wobbling or their mental health
Yeah.
is not stable, the
I,
isolation is really bad.
in answer to your question, I think one really simple tool, we share this on the Jordan Legacy website under the help resources there, something that was introduced to me. And it's a very simple, anyone can create this on a Word document. We call it a well-being support grid. It's something we complete when our mental health is in a reasonably good position, not when we're in crisis, but it's very simply a column to the left that lists everybody kind of known to you in your network, let's call it. And that could be your family, that could be your friends, that could be work colleagues, it could be support groups, online support groups, it could be a mental health charity. It's kind of a whole list of people that you could potentially turn to or go to for support. Then you've got three columns. The first column says who can help you. So if it's a family member, is it mum, dad, brother, sister? Who is it? If it's a work colleague, who is it specifically? what will they help you with, and how will they go about that?
Yes.
And it's a real simple grid. Families should have this, peer groups, friends should have this, workplaces should have this. Everyone should have their own grid that says, if I'm struggling at any point, I'm going to pull that grid out, I'm going to look at it and go, in this instance, I think this person or this organization is where I should go. And it's there in black and white. And this is how they can help me. And this is what they're going to do for me. And I think we kind of need that backup plan. I really do think we all kind of need that. And what's interesting about that exercise is kind of obviously lays out in a grid when you create it, is if when you first write that out, you see lots of gaps and you're not quite sure who you go to. And that's the time to do a bit of research and say, well, if I had to, who would I go to? Yes. Who amongst my friends is the person that I would trust to listen to me and give me that advice? I can tell you from many of Jordan's friends, it was probably Jordan.
Yeah, it is a brilliant but simple piece of advice, really, isn't it?
It's about, the Jordan legacy. If we could say, if it's about one thing, it's about what can we do in a practical sense to prevent suicide.
Planning ahead, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's for someone that's struggling. How, as a carer or a supporter, do you think it's best to support someone?
I think I think the important thing here is you've got to be prepared to have the conversation if you are concerned. I think just letting people know you're there, I think is really important, and you clearly don't want to overcrowd people either. But I think it's a case of the moment you have a concern, being prepared to have that conversation with them and ask the difficult questions as well. We've heard this many times, but it's not enough just to say, look, how are you doing today?
Yes. No, I'm also a psychotherapist, and many times in sessions I've had to say, are you thinking of ending your life? Have you made plans? Is it something you've thought about? Do you know how you would do it? And just to open it up, it's either yes or no, and it's hard for people to actually.
It's a difficult question to ask. I've had to ask it several times this year. Sorry, I've got the window cleaners just arrived.
Okay. I did wonder that you'd had a few people wandering around the room with you there.
I was hoping.
It's not my bad mic.
No. I was hoping they weren't going to arrive in the middle of this conversation.
It's fine. We're all working from home. It's absolutely fine. The story is far better than the quality of our sound.
So it's about to wash my Velux window above my head, I think. But there we go. But yeah, so it's a difficult question to ask, and I think you will only ask it if you've got that level of concern, but you've got to be prepared to ask it. But I think in more general terms, in terms of me popping in to see someone or living with somebody, and they're maybe just not talking much and not doing too well, I think it's not enough to say, look, how are you doing today? Because most people, 90% of the time, are going to say, I'm doing fine, and they'll smile when they say it.
And we know that fine stands for, well, I use a bad word, I won't use a bad word, fed up, insecure, nervous, and exhausted.
Yeah,
if we really answer properly,
That's a great one. Yeah. No, I really love that.
You can use a different F word if you like, but I won't say it on air.
No, but you've got to ask the question. Look, okay, but look, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
And you've got to ask it in that way, in that tone, and more often than not, the person will open up.
Well, often we will say one thing, but actually our body or our face is saying another thing. I'm fine. Well, I can hear you say you're fine, but you don't look like you're fine.
I think the point I need to add to this as well is, look, it's really difficult when you're very close to that person. I look back at, hindsight's a great thing now, but yes, there were signs for me. There were signs in the WhatsApp messages, when Jordan, on a particular day, not long before he took his own life, where we were just chatting about how things are, and he said, oh, well, at least I managed to get up and have a wash and a shave this morning, Dad. And we had a bit of a laugh about it. But I now know, with the knowledge that I have, that someone who's not been able to get up and look after their own personal hygiene and wash and dress is in a pretty bad place.
But the important part is what you said is what I know now, and you didn't know that at the time. And so it's maybe the saver or the mother in me. You do the best job that you do at the time
with the tools you have.
Absolutely. So now you have greater knowledge and understanding.
But I think, again, I think it's so important. What I would say again to the people that are caring and looking after people: educate yourself.
Yes.
Learn about mental health. You've got to become a mental health first aider to do that. But there's enough information out there.
And you have done that now, haven't you? I saw your certificate.
Yes, I've taken the plunge. It's my only preparatory qualification since I left school, I think. But that was a phenomenal experience. And within 72 hours of actually completing that, I had to apply part of what I used in, to support somebody who's looking to support someone else. But become educated, and even if it's a very simple level of understanding what depression and anxiety and stress-related mental health illnesses are about, what the signs are that you need to look out for, and then what do I do, if I do identify these signs. Everyone should get themselves to at least that level, so they know what to do personally or how to signpost that person for help.
Well, I think that's a really good place to end with the advice that you've given, especially before your window cleaner starts coming through your Velux window. Thank you, Steve, not just for coming on the show, but for all the choices that you made and the work that you're doing to help other people. It's sadly needed, and it's really important. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Madeline. Really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share the story as well.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling.